After the transmigration ended, the system suddenly broke down. I stayed and married Luis. 7 years later, the gloomy and obsessive Luis had become a new influential figure in the city. As for me, the heroine of this redemption novel, I ended up as an ordinary and unremarkable housewife. He and his family gradually lost patience with me. One day, a young and beautiful girl found me and smiled, saying, "Sister, if this world were a novel, you and Luis would be part of a redemption story before. But now Luis and I are part of a CEO and children's story." I confronted Luis. He said, "Julia, I want a child. As a transmigrator, I couldn't get pregnant. And he had once promised me we wouldn't have children. But now, he changed his mind." I nodded wearily. Later, the system suddenly went back online and asked if I wanted to leave. I said, yes. Before leaving, I erased all traces of myself and left decisively. Let him, in the years to come, be with any woman he wants. Yet whenever he thinks of me, he feels an intense pain, and I, with the points earned from his regret, returned to my real life, living a vibrant and colorful life. Chapter 01. As a beginner in transmigration, the first world I was tasked with was a redemption story, where I was to play the role of a sunny heroine, saving the gloomy and obsessive male lead. The system said, the storyline for this redemption novel is very simple, and the heroine's personality is quite similar to yours. So it suits you well. I replied, all right. I transmigrated cheerfully, following the storyline step by step, clumsily but sincerely getting closer to Luis. With love and warmth, I touched his heart and helped him reunite with his family, eventually becoming the heir to his family. After many trials and tribulations, Luis finally established his position, and our relationship took a step further. On a romantic Chinese Valentine's Day, the villa was filled with colorful flowers. Like a dream, Luis, wearing a white suit, knelt on the ground, proposing to me with a ring, his eyes intense and passionate. "Julia, I love you. Will you be with me?" The sound of violins resonated softly. I blushed and replied, yes. Then I reached out my hand. This was where the story ended. The ending of the novel contained just one sentence. From then on, Luis and Julia lived happily ever after. My mission was completed, and according to the plan, I should have left this world and returned to my original timeline. However, the system broke down, and it never reappeared. I was stranded in this world. At first, I panicked, but I slowly accepted the reality. Luis treated me very well, and all the small moments we shared during those long years calmed my unease. I decided to abandon the mission and stay in this world to be with him forever. Luis loved me, and I liked Luis too. Like every fairy tale, the prince and princess live happily ever after. Such a life doesn't seem bad, does it? But I never thought about what would happen when the prince and princess lived together for a long time. No one ever told me about something called the 7-year itch. The fairy tales never mentioned it. The girls reading those books naturally wouldn't know. Chapter 02. Today, I have a late meeting and won't be coming home. Before leaving, Luis put on his coat and said this to me casually. The driver and assistant were waiting outside the villa. I couldn't stop him, so I forced a smile and said, all right. Luis left. It was a sunny day, with bright sunshine. Luis's tall and strong figure walked directly into the light. The assistant approached him respectfully. Speaking to him, he smiled and nodded slightly before leaving with steady steps. A normal scene played out before my eyes. Everyone knew that Luis was the rising star of the city. Every move he made was full of the aura of someone in power. No one would associate him with the frail, gloomy boy from the dirty alley all those years ago. Nor would anyone imagine that back then. Luis even felt uncomfortable walking into the spacious, bright, upscale shopping mall, quietly hiding behind me. I pulled him out, bought him an expensive coat, and dealt with the rude shop assistants, building his confidence step by step. It has been more than 10 years. The coat from those days no longer fits, and Luis never wore it again. Just like how I, who was once beside him, no longer belong by his side now. Once, I was his light, his redemption, guiding him out of the darkness and into the sunlight. Now, He no longer needs anyone to guide him. He can walk in and out of those high-end places with confidence, receiving the admiration of everyone. I turned around and walked back into the room. As I passed the hallway mirror, I was stunned by the reflection. It was the reflection of an ordinary woman, aging, wearing a loose brown knitted sweater, her hair tied up casually, wrinkles already showing at the corners of her eyes. She looked gentle and kind, mature and reserved, just like the mistress of any ordinary household. Without the halo of the sunny heroine, this woman appeared all too plain. For a tall and handsome heir, she seemed rather out of place. I sighed softly and picked up my phone to call the florist. No need to deliver anymore. I've broken the contract. You don't have to refund the money. Okay. The florist didn't dare ask further questions, responding quickly. I then called the orchestra and canceled the violinist. After tidying up the table, I sat in the greenhouse drinking coffee, staring off into the distance. Today was Chinese Valentine's Day. I wanted to create a romantic date, ordering lots of flowers and booking a violinist, hoping to recreate the atmosphere from when Luis proposed to me 7 years ago. But Luis had another meeting, and everything I prepared had gone to waste. Chapter 03. After taking care of the 4 cats in the greenhouse, I heard the doorbell ring. Sandra, our housekeeper, opened the door, and I faintly heard her greet someone respectfully as Miss Zoe. I walked over to take a look and saw a girl standing at the door who wasn't entirely unfamiliar. The girl had long, straight black hair draped over her shoulders. Her skin was fair, and her eyes were big and dark, with curled lashes. She looked young and fresh, wearing a professional-looking business suit. She smiled at me and said, "Sister Julia." When she smiled, dimples appeared on her cheeks, and her eyes curved, radiating sweetness. I vaguely remembered seeing her at Luis's company. "You are." "My name is Zoe. I'm Mr. Luis's secretary." The girl introduced herself and continued, "Mr. Luis left some documents at home, so I'm here to pick them up." As she spoke, she showed me the watch on her wrist, saying, "This is my token." I recognized it immediately. It was Luis's watch. "Oh, come in." I nodded. The girl walked inside, and without any guidance, she went straight upstairs, accurately finding Luis's study. She searched for a while but didn't find what she wanted, so she walked out and went to my and Luis's bedroom to continue searching. Watching her move about so familiarly, I frowned. How did she know where the study and our bedroom were? Eventually, after searching for a while, the girl looked up and said to me with a sweet smile, "I couldn't find it. I'm sorry. Maybe Mr. Luis made a mistake. The documents aren't at home." With that, she went downstairs and left. After she left, I asked Sandra, "Do you know her?" Sandra replied, "Madam, she has been here a few times when you weren't home. Brought over by Mr. Luis." I paused. "Really? Why did he bring her here?" Sandra said, "It seemed to be for work." After a long moment, I simply replied, "Oh, back in the greenhouse." I hesitated for a while before calling Luis. He didn't answer. He must have been busy. He didn't like me calling him during work, so I dared not bother him again and sent him a message on WeChat instead. "Did you lose any documents? Someone came to the house looking for them." 2 hours later, he replied, "No." Who came to the house? A gust of wind blew by, and I suddenly felt a bit cold. Without replying, I put down the phone and got up to close the window. The sky had become overcast without me noticing. I stared off into the distance, lost in thought. After getting married, Luis and I gradually grew distant. After being married for a long time, it seemed only natural for passion to fade and for things to cool down. Ordinary couples have children to maintain the bond, but as a transmigrator unable to have children, Luis and I would simply face each other in silence every evening after work. The big house that I used to love gradually became empty and cold. For someone like Luis, a leader among men, it was only natural that countless girls would line up for him. I always believed he wouldn't cheat. This was the first time he had brought a girl home behind my back, even allowing her to have enough confidence to come to my door and make a statement. Chapter 04. I hesitated for a long time but did not confront Luis as Zoe intended. She dared to come, probably because she couldn't hold back and wanted me to make a scene, so she could take the opportunity to announce her presence to the world. But she underestimated my nature. I was never one to make a fuss. I was the emotionally stable Mrs. Louise. Life went on. During the weekend family gathering, my mother-in-law welcomed me with a smile, showing much care and giving me a small gift, a red string with a small gold bead. It was a gesture of blessing. Not long after dinner, I wisely went to the small living room to be alone. Unexpectedly, a few of my sisters-in-law and female cousins came in, discussing the gifts they had received as they walked. Mother's diamond necklace is worth $1 million. Mom gave me a watch. It's worth hundreds of thousands. What about you? A jade bracelet. Looks like it's worth hundreds of thousands too. The sister-in-law who received the diamond necklace was very pleased, her beautiful face glowing with joy. The elder and younger cousins were unhappy, thinking that only getting gifts worth hundreds of thousands showed favoritism from my mother-in-law. They compared their gifts, discussing who was more favored, and decided to try to please the elders even more. After they left, I stood up from the sofa, touched the simple gold bead on my wrist that was worth only a few hundred, and smiled after a moment of silence. Because I couldn't have children, my in-laws had some grievances against me. Back when Luis was away from home, I took care of him and sent him back to his family. I had done my mother-in-law a favor. Even if she didn't like me, she wouldn't show it openly. She would only make distinctions in subtle ways. This wasn't the first time, nor would it be the last. I never minded. As a transmigrator, in this world, besides Luis, I didn't care about anyone else. I only wanted Luis. After the gathering, Luis and I got in the car and left. The entire way was silent. When we arrived home, I got out of the car first, ignoring Luis, and went straight upstairs from the garage. As the elevator doors closed, Luis walked over. He watched me leave alone, with an astonished look in his dark eyes. The situation with Zoe, coupled with today's gathering, had eventually affected me, leaving me with emotions. I rarely got angry. My emotions were always as calm as lake water. My words gentle, even using interjections to soften the sharpness. Leaving him behind like this was already a major incident. Luis should understand. After going upstairs, I immediately saw the living room filled with flowers and heard the soft sound of a violin playing. And I was stunned. The elevator doors opened, and Luis walked out, embracing me from behind. His warm lips pressed against my ear as he spoke in a low voice. Sorry. I forgot the day before yesterday was Chinese Valentine's Day. Sandra said you had prepared a candlelight dinner. I've been so busy these past few days that I forgot. Can you forgive me? The sourness in my heart suddenly disappeared. I turned around and gently kissed him. I said, Zoe came to the house that day to get some documents from your study and bedroom. Luis's brow moved slightly. Oh, I never asked her to do that. She was too presumptuous. Really? Julia, you have to remember, you will always be the one I love most. I knew what I was saying, and he knew too. He knew what he was saying, and I knew too. After the tacit understanding between husband and wife, we each took a step back and didn't discuss the topic anymore. He continued kissing me. The rain stopped overnight, and the sky, which had been gloomy for several days, became clear. I hummed a song as I watered the plants in the greenhouse. Sandra walked over, smiling. Madam, you seem to be in a good mood? I smiled. Yes. I thought the matter was over. Luis would deal with Zoe, and I would continue to be the immovable Mrs. Louise. But I was wrong. Chapter 05. A month later, Zoe came to the door again. As soon as she entered, she took off her luxury coat, revealing a thin undershirt. The undershirt fit snugly, outlining her slightly swollen belly. It was clear and unmistakable. The innocent-looking girl gently touched her stomach, her smile sweet. Sister, I'm pregnant. She and I sat on the living room sofa, the atmosphere amicable. I quietly listened to her talk about her love story with Luis, as if I were listening to a romantic drama. Zoe's eyes were full of light, and that kind of expression, I had once seen it on my own face in the mirror. Before we got married, filled with hope, dreaming of the future, believing I was happy. Sister, if this world were a novel, You and Luis would be part of a redemption story before, but now Luis and I are part of a CEO and children's story. She spoke softly. I nodded. It does seem that way. After Zoe left, I called Luis. He still didn't answer. Suddenly, my heart seized with pain, as if a wound I had tried to ignore finally reached its limit and tore open. Blood rushed out, and the pain was unbearable. The usually calm me cried uncontrollably. It wasn't until Luis entered the room that I realized I had cried all afternoon. When he saw my swollen eyes, his calm expression cracked. He hurried over to wipe my tears. Julia, what happened? Why are you crying? I couldn't catch my breath. It took me a long time to calm down and ask him. Zoe is already 3 months pregnant. Is there anything you want to explain? Silence. Awkward silence. Luis wasn't one to talk much, nor was he one to lie. The room was unlit, and the night shadows covered his face, making it blurry. For a moment, I couldn't make out what expression he had. After a while, he suddenly knelt down on one knee, then the other, placing his large hand on my knee, looking up at me sincerely. I'm sorry, Julia. I want a child. He wants a child. I sat in the wicker chair in the greenhouse, staring at the gloomy sky in the distance. The weather was unpredictable, sunny one moment, overcast the next, hard to grasp. Just like emotions, it was all my fault for foolishly thinking that love could be eternal. But in this world, aside from the mountains and rivers, the sun and moon, among humans, only death is eternal. That night, Luis and I slept in separate rooms. In fact, for the past few years, we often slept in separate rooms. We had become more and more like roommates. A fragile relationship. A child, just one child, was enough to break whatever bond we had. Long before we got married, I had told him that I couldn't have children. At the time, he swore it didn't matter. I believe he once loved me deeply. I believe he truly didn't mind that I couldn't have children. I believe in his determination at the time to grow old with me. But unfortunately, people's hearts change. Promises are eventually broken. What once was, is only a memory. What once was, is now in vain. Half asleep, I suddenly heard a long-lost voice in my mind. Host. It's me. I'm back. It was the transmigration system. It finally went online again. It told me that there had been a malfunction, which made it impossible to contact me. It had been watching everything unfold helplessly. You should have left long ago. Host. Do you want to go back now? I nodded wearily. Yes. If I had known that our marriage would end in shambles, I would never have married Luis. Let the memories stay in the most beautiful moments, rather than what it is now, full of chaos. With each of us in an awkward state, my personality has always been mild, and since things have come to this, I will choose to let go and leave. All right. We will arrange for you to fall ill with a terminal disease immediately. Considering our previous mistake, we have decided to offer you compensation. What kind of compensation? If you can make Luis feel regret, the points you receive will be substantial, and you can use them to exchange for good things in your original world. Hearing the system's explanation, I thought for a moment, then softly asked, will he regret it? System, huh? Of course he will regret it if you die. I sighed and said, the feelings had already faded, and now that his little lover is pregnant, they would just find me to be in the way. If I die, he should be relieved, not regretful. System, but he loves you. Love? I smiled bitterly and shook my head. Enough. I have nothing to lose. I'll do something before leaving. If he really regrets it, I can earn some points. If he doesn't, it doesn't matter. I'm tired. I just want to leave. Leaving him is my greatest wish. Chapter 06. The next day, I went to the hospital and was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Holding the report, I felt very calm, not surprised at all. My doctor friend Clara, however, had tears in her eyes as she held my hand and said, Julia, stay strong. There's still a chance of success. I smiled and patted her hand. It's okay. I'm not planning to have surgery. Julia, I want to spend my final days peacefully. Only 1 month left. Enough time to say goodbye to this world I've lived in for decades. Strangely enough, when I died in my original world, I was only 23. In this world, I've lived for nearly 20 years. The length of time lived was about the same. Yet I never felt a sense of belonging here. Perhaps everything was foreshadowed. I just hadn't realized it at the time. When I got home, I placed the report on the bedside table. My emotions were mixed. I hoped Luis would discover it soon. But at the same time, I hoped he wouldn't. But I overthought it. After our fight that night, he didn't come home for a whole week. Sandra had taken leave. In the large villa, it was just me, all alone. It was so quiet around. I made up my mind when I returned to my original world. I would definitely not buy a villa. A 100 square meter home would be enough. At least living alone wouldn't feel lonely, nor would it feel empty and vast. With nothing better to do, I sorted through my things: clothes, shoes, accessories, and an old box. The box was something I bought many years ago, filled with small items, cheap earrings Luis gave me when he was young, a small bunny he bought for 10 yuan at the high school gate, and an album he secretly saved money to buy for me. The album held our photo booth pictures from many years ago. Young people nowadays don't take photo booth pictures anymore. Things that have become obsolete should have been thrown away long ago. Just like the love between Luis and me, it too should be discarded. I burned a basin in the garden, throwing everything in one by one. The bright red flames flickered. On this lonely, silent night, the disappearance of these old things added a bit of warmth to me. The next day, I sold all the flowers in the greenhouse at a cheap price. The florist owner couldn't believe it and asked, "Are you really selling them for just 1 yuan?" I smiled and nodded. 1 yuan. He happily had people come and take all the flowers away. Not just the flowers, I sold my clothes, bags, shoes, and accessories all for 1 yuan. After all, I couldn't take them with me. It was better to clear it all out sooner. Of course, I didn't touch the valuables Luis's family had given me. Everything I bought, I sold for 1 yuan. I tore up every photo of me in the villa. Any trace of me was cleaned up. After I was done, I realized the villa didn't look much different. I realized once again that whether I existed in this home or not seemed insignificant. Once, I thought I was the owner. Now, after clearing everything out, I realized I was never the owner. I put the last few pieces of clothing into my suitcase, as if I were about to go home. This act gave me a sense of ceremony, a feeling of happiness. I called Luis, wanting to have a proper conversation, a farewell of sorts, but the call never connected. My heart felt a brief pang, but then I felt at peace again. I went out and met a few friends, having normal conversations and quietly saying my goodbyes. I also visited some old places and old acquaintances. By the time I had done all of this, more than half a month had passed. I called Luis again. Beep, beep, beep. Luis still didn't answer. I was stunned. Why? Was I really so hated? All right then. So, goodbye. I picked up my suitcase, left the villa, and went to the rehabilitation center I had booked. I'm going home. Goodbye. My love. Goodbye. This world. Chapter 07. To be honest, while doing all of this, I had a bit of a vengeful feeling. I wanted Luis to know how angry I was. I knew that Luis actually cherished those things I had collected. He often asked me to take them out so we could reminisce about our younger days. Now, they are all gone. I wondered if, when he was with Zoe, or rather, any woman, he would think of me? Would he remember me, the woman who once lived with him, and then left resolutely? However, after doing all of this, I suddenly felt it didn't matter anymore, whether he regretted it or not. I didn't know. At our age, feelings had faded, and what was left were entanglements of interests. He wanted a child, but I couldn't give him one. Now that I was leaving, he should be happy, right? The main reason I did all this was because I didn't want my belongings to be left behind and used by a new mistress. Just thinking about it made me uncomfortable. So, I got rid of everything. Life by the sea was peaceful. There was the wind and seagulls. There was distance and poetry. The system blocked my pain, allowing me to live normally. The nurses treated me carefully, but even though they tried to hide it, their eyes were full of sympathy. I felt a bit helpless. I didn't need sympathy. I felt fine, really. My only confidant, my doctor friend Clara, occasionally came to accompany me, holding my arm as we walked slowly on the beach. "Why didn't you tell Luis?" she asked. "His phone is off," I said. "Off?" She was surprised. "Yes," I replied. "Always off?" "Yes." Clara was very shocked, as if she hadn't expected that to be the reason. Then should I? She took out her phone, seemingly intending to call Luis. I shook my head, reaching out to stop her. "No need." "Why?" I said calmly. "He has a girlfriend now, and a child. He's doing well. There's no need to disturb him." Clara's eyes reddened slightly, and she cursed. "Scumbag!" She took a deep breath and added, "You're right. We shouldn't notify him. Let's not let him come and disturb you, making you unhappy." I smiled. Clara kept asking if I was in pain, and I told her I wasn't. But then she suddenly started crying so sadly. I was telling the truth. It really didn't hurt. My heart felt numb, my head foggy, but it wasn't pain. I was no longer hurting. Time passed quickly, and my life entered its countdown. Clara was very sad, but I was quite happy. When I closed my eyes to sleep, I seemed to see a train approaching me. I was wearing my favorite beige trench coat, standing on the platform with my suitcase, ready to board the train home. That scene made me feel happy. When I woke up and recalled the dream, the corners of my mouth turned up slightly. When filled with hope, even death becomes lovable. Chapter 08. On the third day of the countdown, I couldn't walk anymore. While moving around in a wheelchair along the beach, a seagull landed on my shoulder. I was very surprised and gently stroked its white feathers. It didn't fly away. I was happy all day. I once kept a white parrot in my greenhouse. One day, I forgot to close the window, and it flew away. I was sad for a long time. Luis comforted me, saying he would buy me another one. I shook my head. No need. I wasn't sad because I lost it, but because I was afraid it would die. The thought of it dying alone in fear somewhere made me sad and filled me with guilt. But now I don't think that way anymore. That parrot was lonely in the greenhouse, not living well, always wanting to escape. It flew away and maybe died quietly in a sunny place. That might have been what it wanted. Or perhaps, just like me, it could fly back home? That would make it happy. On the second day of the countdown, I inexplicably coughed up a lot of blood. The nurses were frightened and told me to rest well. After lying down for a few hours, I heard the sound of someone playing ball outside. Through the window, I saw a child in hospital clothes playing with a ball behind the ward. The ball accidentally fell into the flower bushes. The child's body was frail, and he couldn't go get it. His eyes turned red, and he began to wipe his tears. I slowly got up, holding onto the wall, and walked out slowly, helping him pick up the ball from the flowers. He looked up at me and smiled timidly. "Thank you." I was stunned for a moment, feeling as though I was seeing something from many years ago. The first time I met Luis was in that dark alley, where he was being beaten up by a group of people. I walked over and shouted, "The police are coming!" The boys panicked, dropped him, and ran away. I picked up Luis's school bag and handed it to him. He looked at me, took the bag, lowered his gaze, and his long lashes trembled like a butterfly's wings as he whispered, "Thank you." Back then, he was covered in bruises, his cheeks swollen, looking awkward and shy. At that time, I was only thinking about completing the mission, finding him a little pitiful yet endearing. Never did I imagine that I would fall in love with him step by step. Eventually, I fell completely, marrying him and becoming his wife, even foolishly dreaming of growing old together. When I came back to my senses, the child had already left. All around, it was quiet, as if the child had never been there. Luis's shadow, too, had vanished. The pressure from the brain tumor, many once vivid memories now blurred, impossible to recall clearly. My mind felt emptier and emptier. I gradually forgot how I had fallen in love with Luis. I forgot how deeply I once loved him. I forgot the vows he once made. He disappeared bit by bit from my mind. On the last day of the countdown, the sun was shining brightly. I had very few memories left. I vaguely remembered that I was a heroine, meant to save someone. I walked slowly into the sunlight. The warmth from the sun embraced me. I lifted my head, trying to recall who I was supposed to save. Who was I supposed to save? I sat down on the dry sand, feeling warm, with the sound of waves in my ears and the endless blue in the distance. Seagulls circled overhead. I took a breath, slowly lying down, staring dazedly at the seagull above. Who was I supposed to save? Why did I need to save someone? Did that person need me? It felt like I needed to go home. Yes, home. I want to go home. Chapter 09, Clara's Perspective. Julia's body was found on the beach. When she died, there was a peaceful smile on her face, the corners of her mouth slightly upturned. She left very peacefully, as her best friend. Even though I was prepared for it, the pain was still overwhelming. Miss Clara, the head of the hospital, looked at me anxiously. I sighed. It's not your fault. It was her own choice. Julia didn't like being confined to a hospital bed. She didn't like being restrained. To die in a beautiful place, perhaps that was her wish. Many times, I couldn't understand her. There was a gentleness to her aura, without any aggression, but she always seemed distant, never close to anyone. It was as if there was a layer of mist between her and this world, as if she could leave at any time. She was in the world, but not of the world, except for Luis. Julia was like a kite, and Luis was the only one in the world who could hold on to her. Now that Luis had let go, Julia, like a kite, had drifted far, far away. I called Luis. Clara? He answered quickly, sounding a bit surprised. I was stunned. In Julia's description, Luis was always busy, too busy to answer calls. So, eventually, she stopped calling and only sent messages unless it was something urgent. Because she didn't want to disturb him. Even when she got sick, she wanted to tell him. But Luis didn't answer. Yet now, I easily got through to him. It's me. A surge of anger suddenly rose in me. Are you very busy? Not really. Busy taking care of your pregnant mistress? There was a moment of silence on the other end. Julia told you? Yes. How could you? My fault. I won't deny it. If you wanted a child, why did you make promises to her? Why did you marry her? He interrupted me. I had no choice. The family needed a child. Ha. Still saying this now. My eyes reddened, and I questioned. No choice? What a no choice? Julia called you countless times recently. Why didn't you answer? Luis didn't reply. I raised my voice. Why? Was it that hard to answer the phone? Luis was silent for a long time before he finally responded. I was wrong. I didn't know how to face her. So you just left home, leaving her alone, ignoring her calls, never showing up. I wanted her to have time to process everything. And I needed time too. We both needed time. Time? Have you sorted things out now? Did your mistress abort the child? Or have you broken up with her? Luis didn't answer. After a while, he asked, Is Julia next to you? Did she ask you to question me? I was instantly furious. What? She can't question you? Are you proud of what you've done to her? Luis seemed somewhat annoyed. Miss Clara, what goes on between Julia and me is none of your business. I took a deep breath. Fine. Then come and talk to her yourself. There was silence again on the other end. I yelled angrily. Coward! You dare to do it. But you don't dare to face it. If you don't come today, don't ever think about seeing her again. I hung up the phone, looking at the pale woman lying in the bed with her eyes closed. I didn't know what to do. Julia had already left a letter and some money, asking the hospital to cremate her body and scatter her ashes into the sea. She had arranged everything perfectly, just like herself, calm and gentle. Back then, the love between Julia and Luis was the kind of beautiful romance that everyone envied. Everyone believed they would be together forever. Julia, you doing this makes me lose all faith in love. I crouched down and cried. The phone rang. I picked it up and saw that it was Luis calling. Where is she? She's not at home. Of course. She wasn't at home. I said. The Seaside Rehabilitation Center. Rehabilitation Center? What's she doing there? Luis asked. I wiped my tears away and said coldly, "She's dead. Come quickly to collect the body." Chapter 10, Clara's Perspective. When Luis arrived at the rehabilitation center, his face was filled with anger, his brows furrowed. "Miss Clara, don't joke about this." He saw me and spoke in a stern tone. I said coldly, "Follow me." He took a deep breath, suppressing his anger as he walked into the morgue. "Clara, don't go too far." Luis frowned again as soon as he saw the word morgue. "Get in." I was too tired to argue. He hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. Julia lay quietly on the cold small bed. I pointed at Julia and said indifferently, "She's there." Luis froze, halting his steps, a look of fear flashing across his face. "Who is that?" "It's Julia," I said. "Go take a look." The man suddenly took a step back, shaking his head. "No, I won't go over there." I was a little surprised. I hadn't expected this reaction from him. He seemed terrified. I forcibly pushed him to the side of the small bed. "Look carefully." The man stood frozen, his body stiff. After a long while, he suddenly knelt beside the bed, letting out a wailing cry from his throat. "Julia!" Luis fainted. A group of people hurriedly carried him away. Not long after, he woke up, jumped off the bed, and asked everyone he saw, "Where is Julia? Where is she?" He looked deranged. Seeing him like that, I was confused. He seemed to love Julia deeply, but if he loved her, why treat her coldly? Why find another woman to have a child? Or was it all just an act of affection for the show? Oh, right, he's a CEO. If it got out that he disappeared while his wife was dying of cancer, spending time with his mistress, the stock price would crash. I sneered. "Stop pretending to be a good man. It's disgusting." Luis turned to look at me, his eyes bloodshot. Those eyes looked like they wanted to devour someone. It didn't seem fake. My heart skipped a beat. I took a step back and continued, "There are no reporters here. All your acting is useless now. Save it for the funeral. There will be lots of people then. And reporters too, crying and wailing in front of the coffin. That way the whole world will think you're a good man. No one will know that while your wife was dying of cancer, she called you over and over again, and you never answered, disappearing instead to spend happy days with your mistress." "I didn't." Luis clutched his head. "I didn't." "Oh, you didn't ignore Julia's calls? You didn't disappear for a month without seeing her? You didn't have a mistress? You didn't have a child?" I. Luis's lips trembled, his eyes bloodshot. I feigned surprise, covering my mouth. "Oh, did someone tie you up, lock you in a dark room, take away your phone, and force you not to contact her? Oh my, you went through something like that? How tragic. No wonder you look so lost. You must have been kidnapped, right? It's understandable to be upset." Luis held his head, tears streaming down his face. He suddenly stood up, staggering towards the morgue. But the morgue was already empty. "Where's Julia? Where is she? I want to see her," he shouted loudly. I walked over and said, "Julia left instructions that her body should be burned immediately after her death, and her ashes scattered into the sea. I called you earlier to come, but you didn't believe me. Now the time has come. Of course she's already been cremated." "No, I didn't even get a proper look at her. How could you burn her?" Luis screamed hysterically, trying to get Julia's body, due to his manic state, causing a commotion. He was restrained by the security guards. I was a bit frightened. I couldn't help but wonder if Luis wasn't pretending but was truly heartbroken. It was strange. If he really loved Julia, then why had things ended up like this between them? Chapter 11, Clara's Perspective. After hesitating for a long time, I finally told Luis where the crematorium was. Without saying a word, Luis rushed there. When he arrived, Julia's body had already been cremated. The staff were carefully collecting her ashes and placing them into an urn. Luis seemed to have regained his calm. He took the urn, signed the documents smoothly, and showed no expression on his face. It was too calm. I had an uneasy feeling. On the way back, neither of us spoke. After a long while, Luis asked in a hoarse voice, "Why did Julia suddenly?" I said, "A month ago, She felt unwell. She went to the hospital for a checkup, did a CT scan, and found out she had a brain tumor. I observed the man's expression through the rearview mirror as I slowly explained everything I knew. Luis occasionally interjected to ask questions. I answered truthfully. That's not true. He sneered. Julia isn't dead. I was stunned, completely unable to understand why he suddenly said that. Luis's gaze was sharp, just like when he negotiated with business rivals. Aggressive and forceful, she was perfectly fine. How could she suddenly have a brain tumor? I saw the routine medical reports before. There was nothing wrong. And now, within a year, she suddenly gets a brain tumor? I said, Luis, a year may seem long or short. The development of cancer varies from person to person, sometimes even within a month. It can develop very quickly. Luis was silent. After a while, he said, I didn't see Julia's body at the crematorium. All I saw was this box. Why should I believe she's dead? I know she's angry, and you're all teaming up to deceive me, aren't you? In the rearview mirror, Luis suddenly looked up. His eyes filled with madness. My heart sank. I hadn't expected Luis to deny Julia's death. Didn't you see her body in the morgue? No, I didn't see it. I saw nothing. Luis exploded in fury, shouting hysterically. I had never seen him like this, so terrifying. I didn't dare provoke him further and drove him back to the villa. Honestly, I regretted asking him to come. Julia said she wanted to leave quietly, without telling Luis. Perhaps she had already foreseen the situation? I shouldn't have interfered. But if Julia had just died like that, and Luis knew nothing, continuing on to have a child with his mistress, I couldn't swallow that. Luis's mental state had clearly deteriorated. He was trying his best to deny Julia's death. After taking him back to the villa, Luis silently carried the urn inside, calling out, Julia. No one answered. Look, she usually ate at this table, watched her tablet on the couch. Luis pointed at the dining table and the couch, muttering, nothing has changed. Julia is still here. He said that nothing in the house had changed, stubbornly believing that Julia would suddenly walk out from somewhere, just like before. Has nothing really changed? I asked softly. What? Luis asked. I pointed to the photo album on the shelf, where their wedding photo had been torn apart, leaving only Luis's image. Luis's eyes widened, and he rushed over to grab the album. Then, as if remembering something, he ran up the stairs. I followed him and saw him rummaging through the room. There's nothing. Why is there nothing? I asked. What is missing? He didn't answer and hurriedly ran out of the room, shouting, Sandra! Sandra! Sandra came out of her small cottage nearby. Sir? Where is my wife? Where is she? Sandra looked confused. Sir, Madam has been gone for a long time. Then where are her things? Luis asked harshly. Sandra said, they were sold. Luis froze. Sold? Sandra nodded. Some time ago, Madam sold all the flowers from the greenhouse for 1 yuan each and her clothes and jewelry for 1 yuan each as well. I asked her why she sold them so cheaply, and she said she was going home and wouldn't need them anymore. A lot of people knew about it. People from the community came to buy her jewelry, the small things that couldn't be sold. She burned. Luis quickly ran downstairs, heading to the greenhouse. The glass greenhouse was empty. Not a single flower was left. He stood there dazed for a while, then suddenly rushed into the backyard, seeing a patch of scorched grass on the lawn. It seemed to be where Julia had disposed of the unsold old items before she left. Sandra followed and continued. Madam also asked me to tell you, if you returned, that the expensive items you bought for her were untouched, still in the cabinet. Her things have all been dealt with, and space has been made. You can bring Miss Zoe back, have children here, and live a normal life. Luis slowly squatted down, covering his face with his hands. I looked around, imagining Julia calmly and peacefully burning her old items, selling her belongings for 1 yuan each, erasing her traces bit by bit. Suddenly, my heart felt like it was being torn apart. I could hardly imagine how she must have felt when she learned she had cancer and couldn't reach her husband, how desperate she must have been to make such a resolute decision. What was she feeling when she walked into the rehabilitation center alone, lying on the beach, dying slowly without anyone by her side? She must have been so sad, so hurt. Luis seemed on the verge of losing his mind, but I couldn't muster any sympathy for him. In fact, I even found it a bit repulsive. A love that comes too late is worth less than grass. No matter how much he acted, Julia was already gone. It was all over. The person had been delivered. I had nothing more to do here, so I turned to leave. I felt empty inside, unable to lift my spirits. 3 days later, someone called me to ask about Luis's whereabouts. Only then did I find out that Luis had disappeared. Along with him, the so-called Mistress Zoe was also missing. Chapter 12, Clara's Perspective. The call came from Luis's mother, Monica. Monica was very anxious when she learned that Luis had disappeared after meeting me. She came to my door. "What did Luis come to see you for?" The woman's voice was frantic. I said, "Julia died, and I asked him to go to the rehabilitation center to take care of the remains." There was a moment of silence on the other end, as if she couldn't believe it. "Julia is dead?" "Yes. She had a brain tumor. The mistress came while pregnant to pressure her, and Luis abandoned her. She didn't want treatment, so she contacted me and asked me to find her a rehabilitation center to spend her final days. But Luis seemed unaware of her illness. After Julia's death, I called him to collect the remains. He couldn't accept it. I took him back home and left, and I haven't been in contact since. As for why he disappeared, I have no idea. I explained truthfully. Monica listened in silence and hung up. With the power of Luis's family, Luis and his mistress were found 2 days later. However, they were both found dead. Police pieced together the events based on the scene and surveillance footage. Luis found his mistress and demanded she get an abortion and leave. The mistress refused no matter what. The wife was dead. She was pregnant with the family heir, and she was about to take her place in the spotlight. How could she give up at this moment? In a fit of rage, Luis forcibly took her to the hospital for an abortion. This part could be seen in the hospital surveillance. There was a struggle and argument between the two in the hallway, and Zoe managed to escape, with Luis chasing after her. People in the hospital confirmed that the two were indeed loudly arguing in the hallway. After leaving the hospital, Luis grabbed Zoe by the hair, dragged her into the car, and went to another hospital. Zoe resisted desperately, trying to escape. In the end, Luis caught her and decided not to take her to the hospital. Instead, he drove straight to the rehabilitation center where Julia had died. What followed was cruel and bloody. Luis tied Zoe up and used a knife to cut open her abdomen, removing the several-month-old fetus and discarding it. The entire process was nothing short of horrific. Zoe screamed and begged for mercy, but Luis was unmoved. In the end, Zoe slowly died in extreme pain. After killing Zoe, Luis held Julia's urn and jumped into the sea. "He's gone mad," the police said. I was terrified, recalling Luis's previous behaviors, and I nodded. He really has gone mad. I remembered a long time ago, when Julia got drunk and said that Luis was actually a brooding Yandere, while she was a little sunshiny protagonist. I always thought she was just rambling under the influence. Now, seeing both of their bodies with my own eyes, and knowing what Luis had done, I realized that Luis's true nature might really be as twisted as Julia had said. It was only because they lived under the sun, leading a normal life, that Luis's true nature was concealed until he was provoked, and it erupted. I once thought that Julia was the kite, and Luis was the one holding the kite string. I was wrong, completely wrong. Julia was actually the one restraining Luis. No, my son would never do something like this. Monica was in tears, her face full of panic. I remembered the melodrama within Luis's family. Back then, Monica's nanny had swapped her son with her own child. It led to the cliché drama of the true and false heir. Luis was mistreated and bullied from a young age. It wasn't until he met Julia that his life had light in it. Julia helped him, took care of him, brought him home, helped him regain his lost identity, and eventually, the truth came to light. Monica didn't accept him back then. She only wanted the false son. Even now, that false son remained in the family. I heard that Monica treated the false son's wife better than Julia, because Julia couldn't have children. Back when Luis had no standing in the family, it was with Julia's help that he managed to establish himself. Monica eventually accepted him, It can be said that without Julia, Luis would have remained at the bottom. He would never have seen the light of day. Luis was able to live and become the family heir entirely because of Julia. Their love had withstood many hardships, tested by time, becoming inseparable. So I couldn't understand. How could he deceive Julia and have a child with another woman? Knowing just how painful it would be for her, what Luis said was likely true, that from start to finish, he had only ever loved Julia. No other woman could ever enter his heart. Luis's final choice seemed logical in this context. He was mentally shattered, refusing Zoe's child, and in his madness, he cut the fetus out, resulting in Zoe's death. He hated Zoe, and he hated himself, and so, he held onto Julia's urn and jumped into the sea. "This is all your karma," I said coldly to Monica, "because you forced Luis to have a child. All of this happened. You ruined everything." Monica clutched her chest and fainted. I said those words, which were meant to cut to the heart, then turned and left. The fairy tale had reached its ending. Death had become eternal. After everything was exposed, Luis's family became a laughingstock, and Monica was blamed by everyone, leading to her having a heart attack. The truth about the fake and real heirs came to light, and the family members fought each other for the inheritance, becoming fragmented. No one expected that all of this had started because of that ordinary woman they once looked down upon. When the fairy tale ends, darkness inevitably falls. Chapter 13 Extra. Luis held Julia's urn as he walked to the edge of the cliff. The waves roared, and the wind was bone-chilling. "Julia, I'm coming for you." Without hesitation, he jumped into the cold sea. As he sank, his consciousness started to fade. Suddenly, he saw a scene. In a simple room, a young Julia sat up from the bed, rubbing her temples and asking, "System, am I back?" It looked like she was talking to something invisible. After a while, her lips curled into a gentle smile. "I'm really back. From today on, I'm going to live well." She walked over and pulled open the curtains. Outside, the sun was shining bright, golden light spilling everywhere. Julia stretched, showing a relaxed expression. It was a look he hadn't seen in a long time. Outside, cars bustled through the streets, in a completely unfamiliar city, vibrant and full of life. Was that the world after death? "Julia." Luis struggled desperately, reaching toward the vision, wanting to enter Julia's world. But when his hand touched the vision, it quickly closed, leaving him surrounded by cold darkness. "Julia." No, no. He wanted to be with Julia. He screamed silently, sinking to the bottom of the sea. He would never be able to reach where Julia was. Chapter 14. After returning to my original world and resting for a while, I gradually regained my energy. Those unforgettable feelings seemed to fade quite a bit. Looking back, it was like watching a movie, witnessing someone else's story. "Julia, it's almost time for settlement," the system said. "A great harvest. You know, your friend told Luis about your death, and he regretted it." I was a little surprised. He actually regretted it? Of course! His regret level is still rising, and it will definitely reach the maximum. I smiled, not really caring whether Luis regretted it or not. It was no longer important to me. It took some time to get back to my routine, and then the system appeared again. "Julia, it's time for settlement. His regret level is full. You've earned 1 million points. What a profit." I was a bit surprised. Did Luis really regret it that much? I thought he had stopped loving me long ago. I chuckled. "What's there to profit? You can exchange points for things. For example, you can trade them for unparalleled beauty, immense wealth, a top-tier body, or special skills, all of which would benefit you greatly in the next journey." I was surprised. I hadn't expected such a gain. "What would you like to exchange them for?" I thought for a moment. "Let's leave it for later. I don't have anything in mind right now." By the way, the system hesitated. "What is it? Aren't you curious about Luis's ending?" I paused, then shook my head and smiled lightly. "Not really. He probably regrets it for a while. Stays with Zoe, has a child, eventually forgets about me, and continues his happy life as the heir." The system laughed. "You hold no resentment?" I said. "Not anymore. before I died. I did resent him. I wanted Luis to regret his choices. But after returning to my original world, I realized that his regret didn't matter much to me. Though it wasn't useless, it gave me points. It just didn't affect my feelings anymore. I'm relieved that you can let go. Luis's ending doesn't matter. It's better if you never know. Okay. When it came to Luis, the system seemed like it had something to say that day. But in the end, it didn't. I no longer cared. Looking forward is the only way to be happy.